I had said it as though it were a law of nature, as fixed and unarguable as the tides or the succession of the seasons. No one refuses me twice. I said it to a slip of a woman in a candlelit drawing room, with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in 35 years been made to feel the ground shift beneath his boots, and I have since had ample leisure to reflect upon what a very great fool a man may be while believing himself the wisest creature in the room. She heard me out. She did not blanch nor plead, nor look about her for a chaperone to be scandalized on her behalf. She sank into a curtsy so cool and so perfect that it might have been executed by a duchess dismissing a footman, and within the fortnight she had quitted England altogether rather than have me. I record this at the outset so that you may know what manner of tale you are about to be given, not the tale of how a duke won a woman, but the far more improving tale of how a woman taught a duke precisely how little the world cared for his laws. To understand the magnitude of my error you must first understand the man who made it, and I will not spare him, though he is myself. I was Dominic, Duke of Alderley, and I had been so from the age of 19. When my father was thrown from a horse that no groom had dared tell him was unfit to ride, and I had spent the intervening 16 years discovering that there is scarcely anything a man in my position may want that the world will not hasten to lay at his feet before he has finished naming it. I do not say this to boast, I say it to diagnose. A man who is never refused loses by slow degrees the very faculty of imagining refusal, as a man kept always in a warm room forgets that there is such a thing as cold. I was clever and knew it. I was not cruel and prided myself upon it, for I had seen cruelty in men of my rank and thought myself the better for disdaining it. But between cruelty and arrogance there is a nearer kinship than the arrogant man will allow, and I was as arrogant as a Sunday sermon, and a good deal less aware of it. It was the height of the season when I first saw her, at one of those crushes in a great house off Grosvenor Square, where the candles are too many and the windows too few, and 300 persons of consequence stand pressed together in the heat pretending to enjoy themselves. I had come, as I generally came to such things, less to pike than to be observed partaking. A duke at a ball is a species of ornament, and I had long ago made my peace with the office. I was standing near the doors with old Lord Farley, who was telling me at prodigious length about a drainage scheme upon his Norfolk acres, when I saw a woman on the far side of the room laugh at something her companion had said, and turn her head and not look at me. I am aware how absurd that must sound. In a room of 300, why should any single person's inattention have signified? But you must understand that I had grown so accustomed to being looked at that the sensation of not being looked at struck me with the force of novelty. Wherever I moved in that country, faces turned toward me as flowers turn toward the sun, hopeful, calculating, deferential. And here was a woman, neither plain nor grand, in a gown of some soft grey stuff that no one had chosen with an eye to being noticed, who had glanced once across the whole assembly, found nothing in it to detain her, and gone back to her conversation as though the room contained nobody of the smallest interest. I asked Farley who she was. He squinted and said he believed she was a Miss Carr, some connection of the Wentworths. A young woman of respectable but hardly brilliant means, who painted or wrote or did something faintly unusual with her time, and who was, he added with the disapproval of a man for whom independence in a woman was very nearly a moral failing, reputed to be clever. I have often thought since that if Farley had said anything else I might have let her alone, and lived out my life a smaller and more comfortable man. But clever she was called, and I was clever, and I had reached that stage of the season at which the pretty faces have grown wearisome by repetition, and one begins to hunger for a little sport. I resolved, standing there in the heat with Farley's drainage still trickling into my ear, to make the acquaintance of Miss Carr, and to be charmed by her for an evening, and I had no more notion that I was stepping off the edge of a precipice than a man has who steps confidently onto ice he believes to be stone. I had myself presented to her within the half-hour. She received the introduction with a composure that I found, at the time, delightful, and only later understood to be indifference. She was not a beauty in the reigning fashion, being neither fair nor fashionably fragile. She had dark hair and a wide, humorous mouth, and eyes of a grey so clear and direct that meeting them was rather like being asked a question one had not prepared to answer. She was, I judged, somewhere in the later 20s, past the first flush of the marriage market and evidently not much troubled by the fact. When I made her some graceful nothing about the crush and the heat, she agreed that it was very hot, and observed that heat was the one thing a duke could not command to disperse, which she supposed must be a great vexation to me. She said it perfectly pleasantly. It was a moment or two before I understood that I had been teased. You imagine I am accustomed to command, I said, and are determined to find me ridiculous for it. Not at all, your grace, said she. I imagine you are accustomed to command, and are determined to find yourself agreeable for it. I only wondered whether the two could be got to live together in the same person. It is so rare that they do. I confess it delighted me. I have always had an appetite for a good adversary, and had met so few of late that I had begun to suspect the breed extinct. We fell to talking, and she gave me not an inch. Where other women received my opinions as one receives a gift, with murmurs of gratitude, she received mine as one receives a wager, and returned them improved. She had read more widely than I had supposed any woman read. She had opinions upon Italy, which she had never seen and longed to. She thought my views on the management of my tenants sentimental in the wrong direction and said so, and defended the charge with a precision that left me, for the first time in a considerable while, casting about for a reply. When at length her party rose to depart, I found I had been talking with her the better part of an hour, and that I had enjoyed it more than I had enjoyed anything in a 12-month, and that I had, somewhere in the course of it, decided quite firmly that I would have her. That is the word I use to myself, you observe. Not that I would woo her, nor win her, nor earn her regard, that I would have her, as one has a painting one has resolved to acquire, or a stretch of land that rounds off an estate. It did not occur to me to phrase it otherwise, because it had never before been necessary to phrase such a thing otherwise. I went home that night in unusually high spirits and told myself that I had at last found a woman worth the trouble of marrying, and I meant it as the highest compliment in my power to pay, and is a measure of how far I had to fall that I did not perceive there was any insult in it at all. I laid my siege, as I fancied it, over the following weeks with all the confidence of a general who has never lost a field and who has, in consequence, never once troubled to inquire whether the field wished to be conquered. I contrived to be wherever she was. I studied her habits as a hunter studies the ground. I learned which mornings she walked in the park and which afternoons she spent at her easel. I made myself, by 100 small artful accidents, unavoidable. I sent flowers and books I thought would provoke her, and once a small and rather good landscape in oils that I had bought that morning purely, because she had spoken warmly of the painter. She returned the landscape the same afternoon, with a note thanking me for the loan of it and observing that she could not accept a gift she had done nothing to deserve, and that she preferred, in any case, pictures she had chosen herself, since a picture chosen by another was only that person's taste hung upon one's own wall. And a woman who let a man furnish her walls would presently find him furnishing her opinions. I read the note 3 times. I did not know whether I was affronted or enchanted, and the confusion of the two was a sensation so wholly new to me that I mistook it for the beginnings of love, when it was in truth the beginnings of an education, for she would not be managed. She danced with me when I asked, and argued with me while we danced, and refused with perfect good humour to be flattered, or awed, or manoeuvred toward the conservatory where I might speak to her alone. When I let her understand, by those 1,000 small signals a man of my standing need never make explicit, that my attentions were serious and that the whole world had begun to remark upon them, she declined to be gratified. She seemed, if anything, faintly sorry for me, as one is sorry for a clever child who has set his heart on a thing that is not good for him, and that sorrow, more than any coldness could have done, began at last to prick me. I was not accustomed to being pitied. I did not care for it. It was at the Harringtons' country house party, a fortnight into the autumn, that I brought the matter to its head, and there I made every error a proud man can make in the space of a single conversation. We had walked out, a party of us, to see the ruined abbey that was the chief ornament of the place, and I had contrived, by the small ruthless arts of such occasions, to fall a little behind with her upon the homeward path, where the beeches made a long gold tunnel of the evening light. I remember the light particularly. I remember thinking that everything was arranged as I would have it, the hour, the setting, the woman, and that all that remained was to speak the words and receive the answer that a man in my position had every reason on earth to expect. I did not kneel. I want that recorded, for it is the very heart of the thing. A man in love might have knelt, a man who wished to persuade might at least have made himself, for a moment, humble. I stood and looked down at her from what I have since come to think of as the whole insufferable height of my consequence, and I told her that I had determined to make her my wife. I did not ask, I informed. I laid the dukedom before her as a man lays down a winning hand, and I told her, in terms I found both handsome and generous, that I was sensible of the disparity in our situations, and that I was prepared to overlook it entirely, and that she might command my house, my name, and my protection, and that I did not doubt we should suit extremely well. She was silent for a moment. The beech leaves moved above us, and then she said, with a gentleness that I have never in my life forgotten, "Your Grace, you have paid me the compliment of asking me to be your wife, and I will pay you the compliment of a plain answer. I thank you, and I must refuse you." I did not at first understand her. I am not being figurative. The words reached my ears and conveyed no meaning, as a sentence in a language one has not learned. I asked her to repeat herself, and she did, in the same steady voice, and this time the sense of it arrived, and with it a sensation I could not name because I had never had occasion to name it before. It was refusal. I had been refused. The thing I had believed impossible had occurred quietly on a garden path in the failing light, and the earth had not opened, and she stood before me perfectly calm, having declined the greatest match in 3 counties as easily as she might have declined a second cup of tea. I ought to have bowed and left her. Had I possessed 1 grain of the wisdom I have since so painfully acquired, I should have bowed and thanked her, and let the matter rest. Instead, my pride, which had been struck a blow it did not know how to survive, rose up and did the one thing certain to complete my ruin. I pressed her. I asked her reasons, in a voice that had lost all its practiced grace, and when she said, quietly, that she did not love me, and did not think I loved her, but only wished to win her, I laughed, an ugly short laugh, and told her that love was a poet's invention, and that she was too sensible a woman to refuse a dukedom for the want of it. I told her she would not have such another offer. I told her she was 26 and of modest means, and that the world would call her mad. And then, God forgive me, I said the words that were to follow me across a continent and change the whole course of my life. I looked at her, and I said, "You would do well to consider, Miss Carr. I am not a man who is accustomed to being refused, and I promise you this, no one refuses me twice." I meant it as a threat, or perhaps as a prophecy, some dark assurance that my will would in the end prevail as it had always prevailed, that she had only to be pursued a little longer and pressed a little harder, and she would come round, as everything came round to me. I have gone over that moment more times than I can count, and I cannot to this day tell you which reading I intended, only that both were the readings of a man who believed a woman a fortress to be reduced by patience and force, and never once a person to be honoured by consent. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her grey eyes changed, though it was not fear and it was not anger. It was something quieter and far more final, the look of a person who has heard all she needs to hear and has ceased, in that instant, to hope for better. And then Miss Isabel Carr gathered her skirts and sank before me into a curtsy of such flawless, unhurried grace that I might have been the king himself, and she said, in a voice as level and clear as spring water, "Then you need not trouble yourself, your grace, for I shall not give you the opportunity. I sail for the continent within the fortnight. I have long wished to see Italy, and I find I no longer have any reason to remain in a country where a woman is spoken to as you have spoken to me." She rose from the curtsy. "I wish you very well. I wish you, in time, a wife who wants what you are offering. It is a great deal, and it will make some woman happy, but it is not I." And she turned and walked away up the gold tunnel of the beeches toward the lights of the house, and did not once look back. I stood where she had left me until the light was quite gone. I told myself, as the dark came down, that she could not be in earnest, that no woman of sense would quit her own country to escape an offer that half the mothers in England would have wept for joy to hear, that she was proud, and had been wounded, and would think better of it in a day or two, and that I had only to wait. I believed this because I had to believe it, because the alternative was a thing my whole life had left me unfitted to comprehend. But 11 days later I learned. From the mortifying medium of a paragraph in a lady's letter read aloud at a dinner, I could not decently leave, that Miss Carr had indeed taken ship at Dover, bound for Calais and thence for Paris and Florence and all the golden south she had spoken of on that first hot night, that she had gone calmly and completely as she had said she would, and that she had, in the going, closed a door against me as surely and as quietly as if she had shut it in my face with her own hand. I had passed my whole life certain that every door in the world stood open to me, and would stand open forever, at the mere approach of my name. I stood now, in the empty drawing-rooms of a season gone suddenly grey, and stared at the one that had closed, and could not for my life understand how it had come to be shut, nor how, having shut, it might ever be got open again. It was the first door that had ever been closed against me. It was very far from being the last thing that woman would teach me, but it was the beginning. For a full week after that paragraph was read aloud at Lady Sefton's table, I conduct myself as a man conducts himself who has resolved to prove that nothing whatever has happened. I was seen everywhere. I made myself agreeable, which is to say I made myself insufferable in the particular manner of a man who has something to conceal and believes he conceals it. I rose and rode, and sat through dinners, and stood at the rail of the house and delivered myself of an opinion upon the corn duties that was accounted, by those who account such things, remarkably fine, and I did all of it with the fixed inward conviction that Miss Isabel Carr would tire of France within the month and come home. She had made her gesture, I permitted it. I even, in my grosser moments, admired it, as one admires a good stroke played against oneself in a game one is none the less certain of winning. She had gone abroad to punish me and to teach me a lesson, and when the punishment had run its course and the lesson been, as she supposed, administered, she would return, and I would be magnanimous, and the thing would resolve itself as all things had ever resolved themselves, in my favour and upon my terms. I believed this, I think, for the better part of a fortnight. I have since had occasion to marvel at the sheer architectural strength of a proud man's self-deception, which is built, like the great cathedrals, to bear enormous weight and to admit almost no light. Every fact that reached me I turned obediently to the service of my conviction. When I learned that she had reached Paris, I told myself that Paris was but a stage upon the road home. When I learned that she had lingered there, and taken lodgings, and been seen at the Louvre with her sketchbook as calm as though she had been born to the pavements of the Rue Saint-Honoré, I told myself that a woman must spend a little time abroad to save her countenance before returning, and that to come straight back would be to confess she had fled. I read her every movement as a move in my own game. It did not once occur to me that she was not playing. It was a small thing that first cracked the edifice, as it is generally a small thing. I was at White's, and Ashworth was there, my oldest friend, who had known me since we were two frightened boys at Eton, pretending to fear nothing, and who possessed the one quality I have found rarest in the whole circle of my acquaintance, which is that he did not care in the smallest degree that I was a duke. He watched me across the card table for the better part of an hour, and then he laid down his hand and said, in the mild voice he used, he was about to say something I should not enjoy, "You have not attended to a single card this evening, Dominic. You have won, because you always win, but you have not been here at all. Where is it you have gone?" I made him some answer. I do not recall it. But I recall that when I had made it, he looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had never before seen him turn upon me, and that the expression was pity, and that I discovered I could no more bear it from him than I had been able to bear it from her. "Good God," he said softly, "she has got into you, that Carr girl. She has actually got into you." And he began, gently, to laugh unkindly, but with the helpless astonishment of a man who has watched a great oak stand against every gale for 30 years and now beholds it swaying in a mere breath of wind. "I never thought to see it. I did not think it was in you to be got into. You had better have her then and be done." "I cannot have her," I said, and heard, with a kind of horror, the flatness of my own voice. "She is gone. Then go after her." He said it as simply as he might have advised me to change my bootmaker, and for a moment I could only stare at him, for the notion had genuinely never entered my head. It is a curious feature of a life such as mine that the very obvious frequently cannot reach it. A man surrounded from the cradle by persons whose whole business it is to fetch and to bring things to him does not readily conceive of stirring from his chair and going himself out into the weather after anything at all. Things came. That was the order of the world as I had known it. And here was Ashworth proposing, over a hand of piquet, that I overturn the whole order of it and go. I laughed at him. I told him not to be absurd. I told him that a Duke of Alderley did not go chasing a portionless blue stocking across the channel like a lovesick ensign. That I had estates to govern and a seat in the Lords, and a name that could not be trailed through the watering places of Europe in pursuit of a woman who had made it perfectly plain she did not want it. I said all of this with great firmness, and Ashworth heard me out, and shrugged, and took up the cards again and said only, "As you like. But you will forgive me if I observe that you have named a great many things you possess, and not one of them appears to be doing you the smallest good." I did not forgive him. I went home in a black temper and lay awake until the grey came at the window, and I understood somewhere in those long hours that the temper was not with Ashworth at all. For the truth had begun, by then, to work its way up through the floor of my self-deception like water through a foundering ship, and no amount of firmness of voice could keep it down. The truth was that I was miserable, and that I had never been miserable before, and that I did not know what to do with the sensation, having no practice in it. I had supposed all my life that unhappiness was a thing that happened to other people, to people who wanted and could not have, and here it was, in my own breast, cold and constant, an ache with no seat in the body and no remedy in the world. I went on with my life and found it, to my incredulity, wholly without savour. The clubs, the horses, the great dinners, the deference that met me at every threshold, all of it had turned in a night to ashes in the mouth. I would win at cards and feel nothing. I would be flattered by men whose flattery had once been sweet, and hear in it only its own hollowness. I had been given, as a young man, everything a man could be given, and had never noticed until now that I had not particularly wanted any of it. I had merely accepted it, as one accepts the weather, and now that I wanted something, one single thing, with a violence that frightened me, the whole gilded remainder had gone grey by comparison, as a lamp goes dim beside the sun. And there was worse, and I will set it down, for I have promised not to spare him. There were women. I do not mean to boast, and there is nothing in it to boast of. I mean only that a man in my situation has never in his life to look far for a beautiful woman who would be glad of him, and in those weeks, half in defiance and half in a sort of experiment upon myself, I looked. There was a young widow of great beauty and greater ambition who made it as plain as a woman of breeding may that the office Miss Carr had refused she would accept with alacrity and gratitude. There was the elder Falkland girl, all fairness and soft agreement, who received every opinion I offered as though I had handed down the tablets from the mount. They were charming, they were everything the world would have called suitable, and they would have had me, every one of them, upon a word. And I discovered, sitting among them in the candlelight, that their very willingness was become intolerable to me, that each murmur of assent, each upward admiring glance, each pretty deference did nothing on earth but sharpen, like a whetstone drawn along a blade. The memory of the one grey-eyed woman who had looked at me across a garden path and told me, without heat and without fear, that she did not love me and did not think I loved her, and had been, I now began with terrible slowness to perceive, entirely and exactly right. That was the thought that undid me. It came upon me one wet November night when I had sent the widow's carriage away and sat alone before a dying fire with a glass I did not drink, and it came in the form of a question I had never in 35 years thought to ask myself, which was simply this: why had I wanted her? I had told myself, and told the world, that I had wanted her because she was clever, and because she was a challenge, and because she was rare. But sitting there in the failing firelight, I made myself, for the first time in my life, look under those comfortable words, and what I found beneath them was not comfortable at all. I had wanted her, I saw, because she had not wanted me. Because in a whole nation of upturned faces hers had turned away. Because she had treated me, from the first moment, not as a duke to be flattered nor a fortune to be secured, but as a man, a mere man, to be liked or not liked upon his merits as a man, and no one. I now understood with a shame that scalded me, no one in the whole of my life had ever done such a thing before. My mother had loved the hair in me, my friends save one had loved the access. My tenants had loved the rents forgiven and feared the rents demanded. The women had loved the coronet. And this one woman had looked past every last atom of it, past the name and the lands and the 8,000 a year, and had found the man standing behind them, and had judged him honestly and without cruelty, and had found him wanting, and I had answered her honesty by threatening her. I could not sit still under it. I rose and walked the length of that great cold room and back and again, half the night, a man of 35 learning at last, and too late, the taste of his own soul, and finding it bitter. For here was the thing that finished me. She had been right that I did not love her. On that garden path I had not loved her. I had wanted to own her, which is a different and a meaner thing, and she had seen the difference when I could not. But somewhere in the weeks since, in the missing of her, in the grey ruin of every pleasure that was not her, the meaner thing had died and something else had come up in its place that I had no experience to name, but could no longer honestly call by any name but the true one. I loved her. I who had informed her that love was a poet's invention. I loved her, and I had told her so with a threat, and she had crossed a sea to be free of me, and there was not one power vested in my rank or my fortune or my proud accustomed will that could compel a single grey-eyed woman in Paris to care whether I lived or died. For the first time in my life I wanted a thing that could not be commanded, nor bought, nor won by force, but only given freely by a person who owed me nothing and had every reason to withhold it. I did not know how such a thing was got. I had never had to learn. The town, of course, had begun to talk. It always talks, and it talks soonest of the great, and my sudden gravity, my absence from the pursuits that had known me, my having let slip through my fingers first the car girl, and then the very consolations that lay to hand, were remarked in every drawing-room from Mayfair to the meanest card party in Bath. It was put about that the Duke of Alderley had been refused, actually refused, and had taken it hard, and some laughed, and some were secretly glad. For the great are never short of enemies, who will rejoice to see the ground shift beneath them, and my aunt, the Dowager Lady Marchmain, wrote me a letter of 3 sheets crossed and recrossed, informing me that a man in my position could not afford to be seen mooning after a nobody, that there were 6 eligible girls she could name before breakfast, and that I owed it to the dignity of the family to marry one of them at once and forget the whole unfortunate business. I read her letter through, and I understood that every word of it was what I myself would have said, a 12-month since, to any other man in my case, and I understood that I no longer believed a syllable of it, and I laid it in the fire. I fought it still. I would have you know that I did not go tamely, for a proud man does not lay down his pride as a servant lays down a tray. He clings to it to the last, because it is the whole edifice he has lived inside, and to abandon it is to stand suddenly in the open weather with no roof over his head at all. I told myself that to follow her was madness, that it was beneath me, that it would make me the jest of Europe, that she would only refuse me the more coldly for the presumption, that I should be a great man reduced to a spectacle, chasing across a continent a woman who had shut the door in my face. Every one of these things was true. I said them to myself for a fortnight, riding out alone in the wet mornings, and every one of them was true, and not one of them made the smallest difference, because underneath all of them lay the single plain fact that I could not stop wanting her, and that there was nothing left in England for a man who wanted only what was in France. It was Ashworth, in the end, who said the thing that moved me, though he did not know he had said it. We were riding in the park, and he had forborne, decently, to mention her for a week, and then he said, apropos of nothing, looking straight before him between his horse's ears, "You know, Dominic, the worst of being a man like you is that you have never once had to be brave. You have never had to risk anything, because nothing was ever in doubt. I have sometimes thought it the greatest misfortune of your life." He said it lightly and rode on, and had, I am persuaded, no notion that he had struck me to the bone. For he was right. I had never risked anything. I had never in my life put a thing I wanted upon the hazard of another's free choice and stood, undefended, to hear the answer. And I understood that this, precisely this, was what she had done to me, and what I must now. if I were ever to be worth her regard, learn to do in return. To strip off the coronet that had defended me from every honest hazard of the human heart, and to stand before her as a man merely, wanting, and be refused perhaps, and bear it. I made my decision on a Tuesday, and it shocked me even as I made it, for it was the decision of a man I did not yet know how to be. I would go to her. Not to command her. I had learned that much, at least in the grey weeks, that command was the one thing on earth that would drive her from me forever. Not, if I am honest, to any clear end at all, for I had no plan, no argument, no notion of what I should say when I found her, or whether she would so much as receive me. I knew only that I could not go on as I was, and that everything I wanted was on the far side of the water, and that a man who will cross the water to reach what he wants has no right afterward to complain that he has nothing. I gave orders that appalled my household. I put my affairs into my steward's hands. I told Mount nothing. Told Ashworth only, who shook my hand and said, "At last," and looked at me as though I'd done something creditable, which was a novel sensation, for I had done a great many things in my life that the world called creditable, and none of them had ever felt so. And so it was that on a raw grey morning at the very end of November, I stood upon the deck of the Dover packet as she cast off, with the white cliffs going small and dim behind me and the whole cold heave of the Channel opening ahead, and I understood that I, Dominic, Duke of Alderley, before whom the doors of a nation had stood open all my life, was become at last, and by my own doing, a supplicant chasing a woman who did not want me across a continent that owed me nothing, with nothing in my hands to offer her, but the one thing I had never in my life given anybody, which was myself undefended and at her mercy, and I stood at that rail half appalled at the figure I cut, and could not for my life turn back, and did not. Paris did not have her in the end, though I spent a fortnight there discovering it, and the discovery cost me a great deal more than the fortnight. I had gone to the continent with the unexamined assumption of a man who has never in his life been obliged to find anything for himself, that a person of my consequence had only to arrive in a foreign city and the city would produce, upon request, the object of his search. I learned otherwise and quickly. In London a word to the right footman would have laid the whole map of any person's movements before me by nightfall. In Paris I was nobody, a tall Englishman with indifferent French and a title that made the concierge of my hotel bow no lower than he bowed to the wine merchant in the next room. I called upon such English as wintered there, and was received civilly, and learned that Miss Carr had indeed lodged near the Palais Royal, and had sketched in the galleries, and had been much liked, and had gone south with the first hard frosts, to Florence, where she had spoken of settling for a season among friends. She had been gone from England 10 weeks, and already she had friends in a city I had never seen, and I, who had 8,000 a year and a seat in the Lords, had in the whole of Paris not one soul who would have crossed a street for me. So I went south, over the mountains in the tail of the year, and I will not weary you with the journey, save to say that a man learns something of himself upon a bad road in a foreign country that he can learn nowhere else. I had travelled before, of course, as a young man makes his tour, but I had travelled as dukes travel, cushioned in couriers and letters of credit and the smoothing deference that runs before a great name like a footman clearing a path. I travelled now half incognito, in a hired carriage with a surly driver who cheated me and knew I knew it and cared not at all. And I sat through the cold hours with nothing to do but consider that every mile carried me further from the country in which I signified and deeper into a world that had got on perfectly well without me and would continue to. It was a humbling arithmetic, and I did it over and over, and arrived in Florence at last upon a bright cold December afternoon with the Arno running green under its bridges and the great dome standing up against a sky washed clean by rain, a supplicant with a valise, in the one place on earth where the woman I wanted had made herself a home that had no room in it for me. I spent my first days in that city as a man spends them who has never before had to fill an hour of his own life, and found the exercise strange past bearing. At home my days had been made for me, filled by a machinery of stewards and secretaries and appointments that ran without my touching it. I had only to exist, and the day arranged itself around the fact of me. Here nothing arranged itself. I walked the streets, and stood a long while before the great doors of the cathedral, and dined alone in rooms where no one knew my name, and the waiters served me neither better nor worse than the German at the next table, and I found, to my slow astonishment, that a man reduced to his own company for the first time at 35 must either come to some terms with the creature he discovers there or run mad. I came to terms with him grudgingly. He was not, upon acquaintance, the man I had spent a lifetime advertising. He was smaller and more frightened, and considerably less certain of his opinions once there was no one obliged to agree with them. I had thought, crossing the mountains, that I had learned humility. I had not. I had only learned that it existed. The learning of it was to be the work of that whole Florentine winter, and it began in those empty, solitary days, and I did not enjoy 1 hour of it. I found her within the week, and I found her, as I might have known I should, not by any exertion of my own, but by the plain accident of a small society in which everyone knew everyone. There is a colony of the English in Florence, and about it a wider circle of those who have come to the city for its art, or its cheapness, or its climate, or its freedom, painters and widows and scholars and gentlemen of uncertain fortune and certain charm, and this whole loose, brilliant company revolves, as such companies do, about a few houses where the doors stand open of an evening. I had a letter to one such house, wrung from a connection in Paris, and I went, and I had not been in the room 10 minutes before I heard, across the murmur and the candle light, a laugh I would have known in the dark at the bottom of the sea. She was standing by the far windows with a glass of something pale in her hand, in a gown of deep russet that no London modiste would have dared and that suited her past describing, and she was laughing easily, wholly, at something a grey-headed gentleman had said, and her face as she laughed was the face of a woman entirely at home in her own life. That was the thing that struck me before ever she saw me. Not that she was handsomer, though she was, the southern light having done for her what the London seasons never had, but that she was happy. She had the unmistakable ease of a creature returned at last to its proper element, a plant that has been carried from a cold dim room and set in the sun. England had kept her in a grey gown at the edges of its ballrooms. Florence had put her at the centre of a bright company that hung upon her wit and loved her for it, and she stood there in the candlelight looking 10 years younger and immeasurably freer than the woman who had curtsied to me on the beach path, and I understood, standing unnoticed in that doorway, that I had not merely failed to ruin her by driving her abroad, I had done her the greatest service of her life. Then she saw me. I watched it happen. The laugh did not die all at once. It faded by degrees as she took in the sight of me across the room and refused, with an admirable government of her features, to give the assembly the smallest thing to remark. Only her eyes changed, going in an instant from warm to level, from open to shut, and I felt that shutting as a man feels a door closed in his face, which was no more, I told myself, than I had earned. She said something to the grey-headed gentleman, and set down her glass, and came across the room to me directly, which I had not expected, and which I understood only later was the act of a brave woman who chooses the ground of an unpleasant thing, rather than let it choose her. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied precisely as she had curtsied on the path, cool and flawless. "You are a very long way from Alderley, Miss Carr." I bowed. My voice, I was glad to find, was steady. "I am. I find the county greatly overrated." "Do you?" She looked at me, and there was no warmth in it, but there was, I thought, a flicker of something that was at least not indifference. She was too honest to pretend she was not startled. I had understood a duke could not spare himself from England above a fortnight without the whole edifice of the state coming down. And yet here you stand, in Signora Bianchi's drawing-room, 1,000 miles from your consequence. I confess myself at a loss to account for it. "I came to see Italy," I said. "You spoke of it so warmly. That first evening I thought there must be something in it. It was the wrong thing or the right one. I could not tell which, and neither, I think, could she." Her chin came up. "You came to see Italy," she repeated. "In December. Over the mountains. Alone." She let the 3 facts stand there between us, and I understood that she had counted the cost of my journey more exactly than I had, and that she was giving me the opportunity to lie, and despising me a little in advance for taking it. "No," I said. "I came to see you." "You will forgive the plainness. I have lately conceived a distaste for the other kind of speech, having done myself so much harm with it. She was silent a moment. Somewhere behind her the grey-headed gentleman was watching us with the frank, interested attention of a man who misses nothing, and I was aware of him without yet knowing why he should signify. "That is very direct, your grace," she said at last, "and I will be as direct. I crossed a sea to be quit of you. I do not say it to wound you. I say it because it is true, and because I think you have travelled a great way under some misapprehension, and I would not have you waste more of your winter. Whatever you have come to say, I have already answered it, on a path in Hampshire, as plainly as I knew how. You have, I said. You answered a man who deserved every word of it. I do not ask you to answer him again. I ask only that you permit me to be, for a little while, in the same city, and to make your acquaintance over, if you will have it, upon better terms than I made it the first time. I make no claim. I have none to make. I am aware, and here I heard my own voice do a thing it had never done, which was to falter honestly. I am very much aware that here I am nobody at all, and that the discovery has been the most instructive of my life. Something moved in her face then. It was not softening. I would not flatter myself so far. It was surprise, the pure involuntary surprise of a woman who has braced herself to withstand arrogance and been met, instead, with something she cannot at once find a name for. She had known me only as a man who informed, and here was that same man, in a foreign drawing-room stripped of every prop that had held him up, confessing that he was nobody, and appearing of all things to mean it. She looked at me a moment longer than she had meant to. Then she recollected herself. "You are changed," she said abruptly, low, so that only I should hear it, and it was not a compliment. It was an accusation, almost the words of a woman who had ordered her whole world upon the certainty of what I was and did not thank me for unsettling it. "Or you wish me to think you changed, which is a subtler thing and which I have not yet decided whether to believe. I have known men to grow humble for the length of a courtship, and hard again the day the ring was on. I would sooner have the honest arrogance, your grace. At least a woman knows where she stands with it. So would I have sworn a season ago," I said. "I find I have mislaid it somewhere upon the road. If it should turn up again, I will be sure to let you know, that you may despise me on the old comfortable terms." She looked at me sharply to see whether I mocked her, and found that I mocked only myself, and this too, I saw, was a thing she had no shelf to set upon, and for a moment the level grey eyes were not level at all, but merely puzzled, merely human, looking at a man she had thought she had finished reading and finding the last chapter torn out. "You must let me present you," she said, in a different voice for company, "to your host and to my friends. You will find them a great deal more interesting than the society you are used to, and a great deal less impressed by you, which I dare say will do you good." And she turned, and I followed her across the room, and that was how I came to be made known to Signor Falcone. He was the grey-headed gentleman by the windows, and he was, I saw as I came near him, a good deal younger than his hair, a man of perhaps 45, spare and upright and beautifully at his ease, with the kind of face that a lifetime of intelligent amusement carves into something better than handsomeness. He was a Florentine of old family, I learned, a connoisseur and a patron, a man who had known everyone and read everything and painted a little himself and collected a great deal, whose palazzo across the river was one of the open houses of the city, and whose good opinion was a species of currency in that world that no English coronet could purchase. He took my hand with a warmth that had not one grain of deference in it, and welcomed me to Florence as an equal welcomes an equal, or rather, I thought with a private and unfamiliar sting, as a man secure in his own country welcomes a stranger passing through it, and he said in English better than my own, "So you are the Duke. Miss Carr has never spoken of you." I perceive now that this was itself a kind of eloquence. I could have struck him for it, and I could have embraced him for it was exactly the sort of thing I might have said myself in his place, and had said, in my time, to lesser men. I saw at a glance how it stood. He admired her. He did not trouble to hide it, having, I supposed, no reason to. He had been at her side for weeks in a city that was as his own, doing all the graceful daily things I'd never once thought to do, and I had no more power to command him out of my path than I had to command the Arno to run uphill. In England I should have out-topped him without a thought. A Marquis of Florence and a Duke of Alderley are not quantities that need to be compared. Here the comparison ran altogether the other way. Here he was the great man and I the interloper, and he knew it and was too well-bred to say so, which was worse than if he had. She has been very forbearing, then, I said. There is a great deal she might have told you, and none of it to my credit. Falcone's brows rose a fraction, and he looked at me with the first real attention he had spent, as a collector looks who has taken up a piece he supposed a copy and caught, in the light, the mark of the true hand. Now that, he said softly, is not at all what I expected a duke to say. He glanced at Isabel, and something passed between them that I was not meant to read and read nonetheless, a question and a smothered answer, and I understood that I had, without intending it, disturbed some settled thing. We talked, the three of us and then the wider room, for an hour, and it was the strangest hour of my life to that date, for I was made to work for every scrap of my standing in it. No one asked my opinion. I had to earn the chance to offer one. When I ventured upon the pictures, Falcone knew 10 times what I knew and Isabel knew more than I did, and I was obliged to listen, and to learn, and to confess ignorance, and to discover, to my very great astonishment, that I did not perish of it. Once I said something about a Masaccio that was not wholly foolish, and Isabel turned and looked at me with a flash of pure surprise, as though a chair had spoken, and said, "That is nearly right, Your Grace," and I felt that grudging half-praise more keenly than I had ever felt the flattery of a court. And once later, when the talk had turned to England and someone had said something idle and cruel about a mutual acquaintance, I saw her glance at me, plainly expecting me to join the cruelty, as the old Duke would have, and I did not. I said a plain, fair word for the absent man instead, and she said nothing at all, but she looked at me across the candlelight for the space of a breath with an expression I had not earned from her before, and had crossed a continent to earn and would not name, for fear of frightening it away. It was Falcone who broke it. He had been watching us all evening, with the still patience of a man who understands the whole board, and is in no hurry to move upon it. And now he set down his glass and said, light to the room but for her, "Miss Carr, you are quiet. It is not like you to let an Englishman have so much of the conversation." She laughed and turned to answer him, and the moment closed. But I had seen it, and so had he. And as I made my bow to leave that night, I caught the Florentine's eye across the room, and found him regarding me with a look that held no anger and no contempt, only a cool and courteous acknowledgment, the look of one swordsman to another who has proved, against expectation, to be worth the drawing of a blade. He inclined his head to me the least degree, and I to him, and we understood each other perfectly, and neither of us said a word. And behind him by the windows, Isabel Carr stood watching the two of us with her clear grey eyes, no longer laughing. And I could not for my life have told you what she was thinking, and I understood, going out into the cold, bright Florentine night, that for the first time since that garden path, she was wondering it too. She did not forgive me all at once, and I am glad of it now, for a thing given cheaply is held cheaply, and had she thawed toward me in a week, I should have learned nothing and deserved less. What she did instead was harder to bear and better for me. She permitted me. She permitted me to come to Signora Bianchi's of an evening, and to Falcone's great cool rooms across the river, and to stand at the edges of the bright company she had made, and to be, for the first time in my life, a person of no importance whom others tolerated for the sake of the woman he plainly followed. I had thought I knew what it was to want a thing and wait for it. I had never waited for anything in my life that could not be hurried by the lifting of a finger. Now I learned to wait upon a woman's leisure, upon the accident of whether she would be in a room, upon whether, being in it, she would turn her grey eyes my way and give me a quarter hour of her true attention, or whether she would give it laughing to another. I learned to be grateful for scraps. A duke does not know that word. I learned it that winter, and I have never since unlearned it, and I count it among the few possessions of mine that were come by honestly. It began our real acquaintance with the pictures, because the pictures were her element and she could not help herself in them. Her God came down before a good painting as it came down before nothing else. I made it my business to go where she went, not crowding her, only present, And I asked questions, and I found that a genuine question, honestly meant, is the one coin that will buy the regard of a clever woman when flattery will not. She could not resist teaching. She would stand before some panel of gold and blue that I should have walked past in London without a second glance, and she would tell me why it was not merely old but great. Why the stiff little figures with their grave faces were not the failures of men who could not draw, but the choices of men who meant something particular by them. And I listened, and I began, slowly, actually to see. It astonished me, the seeing. I had owned pictures all my life, a gallery of them at Alderley worth a nabob's ransom, and I had never once looked at a single one. They were furniture, they were consequence hung upon a wall, and I had inherited the having of them as I had inherited everything, without effort and without joy. And here was a portionless woman with a sketchbook who owned not 1 square inch of canvas in the world, and she was richer before a wall of them than I had ever been in my own gallery, because she brought something to them that I had never brought to anything, which was attention. I told her so, one grey afternoon in the cloister of a church whose name I have kept to myself all these years, as a man keeps the name of the place where a thing happened to him that changed his life. You look at things, I said, as though they might look back. I have owned a great many things and never looked at one of them so. She was quiet a moment, her pencil still upon the page. That is the whole of it, I think, she said at last, not looking up. The looking. It is the only thing I have ever had that could not be taken from me, and so I have spent it lavishly. Then she did look up, and there was in her face a flicker of the old wariness, as though she had caught herself giving me something, and meant to take it back. You are learning to say the sort of thing that pleases a woman, Your Grace. I hope you will remember that I told you at the outset I trust at least in the men who do it best. I am not trying to please you, I said, which was a lie, and we both knew it was a lie. And we both knew also that beneath the lie was a truth, which was that I had stopped calculating. The pleasing thing and the true thing had begun, in her company, to be the same thing, and I no longer knew how to tell them apart, and did not wish to. She saw that too. She was always seeing more than I meant her to. It was the most uncomfortable and the most necessary friendship of my life, to be known by someone who could not be deceived and would not be bought. And it was a friendship, though I have shrunk from the word, for a friend was a thing I had never in strictness possessed, save Ashworth, and had not known how to be. We fell, over those weeks, into the small, ordinary usages of people who have begun to be easy with one another. She teased me, which no one had done since I was a boy, and did it without mercy, upon my ignorance and my gravity and the fine coats I had brought over the mountains that were absurd in that plain place. And I found that to be teased by a woman who is not afraid of you is one of the sweetest things a proud man can suffer, being the surest proof that she has ceased, for the moment, to see the coronet at all, and looks only at the fool inside it. I learned to laugh at myself, which I had never done, having taken myself, all my life, with a solemnity that now appeared to me the chief of my absurdities. I brought her books I had read and wished to argue over. I remembered things she had said and returned to them days later, and she noted that I remembered, and was, I saw, disarmed by it, for it is a rare flattery and one that cannot be counterfeited, to prove to a person that their words have lodged in you and gone on working. Slowly, without either of us marking the day it happened, we became necessary to one another's hours. She would look for me in a room before she knew she looked. I saw it, and said nothing, and hoarded it. The city itself did the rest, for Florence is a place that will not let a man keep his armour on. There is no state in it. The great and the small go afoot through the same narrow streets. A marches buys his chestnuts from the same brazier as his cobbler and stands in the same cold to eat them. The whole ancient town is built to the measure of a man on his own 2 feet, and a duke in it is only a tall foreigner who does not know the way. Isabel took a pleasure I could not at first understand in showing me the ordinary things. The market of a morning with its heaped bitter greens and its silver fish and its women crying their wares. The wine sold through a little grated window in a wall to anyone who came with a jug. The workshops where men beat gold into leaf and cut stone into flowers. The small dark eating houses where for a few coins one had a bowl of white beans and oil and bread and the company of carters. She watched me among these things sidelong, and I understood in time that she was conducting an experiment, that she was waiting to see the fastidious great man recoil, and that each time I did not recoil, each time I found instead that a bowl of beans eaten hungry in good company was a better thing than any dinner I had ever sat through at my own table, she was obliged, against her settled will, to revise me. I could watch her doing it. I could watch the account she had closed against me forced open again, an entry struck out, a sum recast. It is a strange courtship in which a man's whole suit consists in slowly proving that he is not quite so contemptible as the lady had every reason to believe. But it was the only suit open to me, and I pressed it, and it prospered. We went once into the country, a party of us, Falcone and Signora Bianchi and 2 or 3 others and Isabel and I, to a villa in the hills that a friend of Falcone's kept, and it was there, upon a bright cold day at the very end of the year, that we came nearest to the thing that had begun to stand unspoken between us. We had walked out after the noon meal along a terrace above a fall of olive terraces silver in the low sun, with the whole valley opening below and the city small and golden in its haze in the distance and the mountains beyond gone blue, and by some grace of the other's tact, or perhaps by some design of Falcone's that I did not then read, she and I found ourselves walking alone. Neither of us spoke for a time. There are silences that are a failure of speech and silences that are better than any speech, and this was the second kind, and I had never in my life known it before, having filled every silence of my existence with the sound of my own consequence. "I owe you an apology I have never made," I said at last, and my voice was not quite steady, and I let it not be. "I do not mean for the thing I said on the path. That was too large for an apology, and I will not insult it with one. I mean for supposing, that whole day and for years before it, that I knew what you were. I did not know the first thing about you. I had never troubled to find out. I looked at you and saw a difficulty to be overcome, and I never once saw the person who was making the difficulty, or asked myself why she made it, or whether she might be right. I have been in Florence 6 weeks. And I have learned more of you in 6 weeks than I troubled to learn in the 3 years I fancied myself your suitor in England. And every particular of it has shamed me, and I would not have it otherwise, for the shame has been the truest thing that ever happened to me." She had stopped walking. She stood with her hand upon the low stone of the terrace wall, and she was looking not at me but out over the valley, and the wind moved a loosened strand of her hair, and when she spoke her voice had lost every trace of the fencing tone she had held against me since the first night. "Do you know what frightens me?" she said. "It is not that you are false. I could withstand you if you were false. I have been withstanding false men since I was 17 and had my portion lost and learned in a single season exactly how much a penniless clever woman is worth in a marriage market. What frightens me is that I begin to think you are not false, and I do not know what to do with a true one. I built my whole life upon the certainty that I should never meet it, and I built it well, and I was happy in it, and I was content to be alone in it to the end of my days. And then you came over the mountains in December and stood in a doorway looking like a man who had lost everything he was sure of, and you have been, ever since, quietly pulling my house down about my ears." She turned then and looked at me full, and her eyes were bright, and not with amusement. "I did not ask you to. I want you to know that I did not ask you to. I crossed a sea so that I should not have to." "I know," I said. My heart was going like a hunted thing. "Isabel, I know it." It was the first time I had used her name. She heard it. Something in her face wavered. Some lost wall of it, and for one moment, one whole trembling moment on that terrace with the valley gold below us, I saw plainly that she was not indifferent to me, that whatever I had become in her sight it was no longer nothing, that had I only had the sense and the grace to say one plain humble thing more and then be silent, the thing I had crossed a continent for might, that very afternoon, have begun to be mine, not taken, not commanded, but given. And here I must set down the worst of it, and I will not soften it, for I have promised through all these pages not to spare him, and this is the hour that most requires the promise kept. For at that moment, of all the moments God or the devil could have chosen, there came along the terrace toward us the sound of Falcone's voice, easy and warm, calling some pleasantry in Italian, and behind it his unhurried step, and Isabel turned toward the sound with a readiness, a small glad lifting of her whole person, that I had spent 6 weeks trying and failing to earn from her, and that she gave him without thinking, because he was her friend, because in this her own country he was the man who belonged and I the one who did not. And something in me that I had believed dead, that I had congratulated myself upon having killed somewhere on the road over the mountains, rose up whole and ugly out of its shallow grave, and before my better mind could lay a hand upon it, it had spoken. "Must he always come?" I said. I heard my own voice do the old thing, the cold flat thing, the voice of the man on the garden path. Wherever you are, whatever hour, there he is at your elbow. One would think, Miss Carr, a woman might contrive an afternoon's privacy in which to be honest, without her tame Florentine appearing on cue to spare her the necessity. I would give a great deal, even now, an old man with the thing long won, to have that sentence back. I saw it strike her. I saw the brightness go out of her face as a lamp is shuttered, and the level grey come down over it, the door I knew, the door I had felt closed against me the first night and had spent 6 weeks coaxing by inches ajar, and it did not close by inches now, it slammed. "His name," she said, very low and very cold, "is Signor Falcone, and he is not tame and he is not mine, and he is the truest friend I have had in this world, which you would know if you were capable of conceiving that a man and a woman might value one another without one of them owning the other. But you are not capable of it. I had begun, God help me, to think you were. I had begun to think the man on the path was gone." She drew a breath and it shook. "You do not me honest. You have never for one instant wanted me honest. You want me one. I am a difficulty to be overcome. You said so yourself 10 minutes since, and I was fool enough to be moved by your saying it, and here you stand not 10 minutes later, the moment another man's shadow falls across your prize, showing me the whole of it again, entire, unchanged. The man who cannot bear that anything he has decided to have should have a will or a friend or a life that is not arranged for his convenience." "Isabel," I said. "Miss Carr," she said, and Falcone was upon us now and had seen, with those seeing eyes of his that missed nothing. That something had broken across the terrace like a dropped glass, and he had the great courtesy to pretend he had not, and offered her his arm with a word about the failing light, and she took it and turned from me, and I stood alone against the stone wall with the gold valley at my back gone suddenly grey and cold to my eye, and watched the two of them walk away toward the house together, her bright head bent to his grey one, and understood, with a completeness that stopped the breath in me, exactly what I had done. I had had it. That was the unbearable part, the part I turned over half the night that followed and half the nights of a wretched week thereafter. I had had it in my open hand, given freely, the one thing that cannot be seized. The wall had been down, her name had been in my mouth and her defences in ruins, and her true self, for one moment, turned toward me unguarded. And the old Duke, the man I had crossed to sea to bury, had needed only the sight of another man at her side to come roaring up out of me and snatch at what was being offered, and to snatch is to crush, and I had crushed it. And I knew even as I watched them go that I had not merely lost the afternoon. I had taught her, with a single sentence, that everything she had feared of me was true, that the humility was a suit of clothes and the man beneath it unchanged, that she had been right on the path and right to cross the sea and a fool, only ever to have begun to doubt it. And there is no argument on earth, no eloquence, no penitence, that can outrun the harm of a thing a man has proved with his own mouth. I could not follow her. I could not call out. I could only stand there in the last of the light and watch the ground I had won by 6 weeks of the hardest and humblest labour of my life slide out from under me all at once and close over, as though it had never been. Leaving the woman I loved walking away upon another man's arm, and no way left in the world for me to reach her. A wiser man, or a beaten one, would have kept to his lodging that week and let the wound close over in silence, and either gone home over the mountains or stayed and troubled her no more. I did neither. I did the thing that pride does when it has been shown its own face and cannot bear the sight. I went out into the bright cold company as though nothing were altered, and I smiled, and I made my leg to Signora Bianchi. And I stood in the rooms where Isabel was and pretended to a man of the world's ease, and all the while there worked in me, under the smile, a slow and poisonous heat that I mistook, for 4 whole days, for injury. I told myself I was the one wronged. I turned the thing over and over on my pillow at night, and arranged it always to the same conclusion, that I had made her a plain and honest apology upon that terrace, had abased a duke's whole pride before a portionless woman, and had been answered for it with a display of temper over a syllable, over the mere naming of a man whose shadow she had run to the instant it fell across our privacy. I nursed the grievance as a miser nurses a coin. It was easier, God knows, far easier, and more comfortable by half, to be angry at her than to look for one honest moment at what I had done. And anger is the lost citadel of a proud man. He will hold it long after every honest defense is fallen, because to yield it is to admit that the ruin was his own doing and no one's else. And so, upon the 5th evening at Falcone's, I did the unforgivable thing a second time. I pressed her. The rooms were full and warm with candles, and there was music at the far end, and I found her a little apart in the embrasure of one of the tall windows, alone for a moment, looking out at the dark bulk of the city and the few lights on the far bank. She did not turn when I came up. She knew my step by then, as I knew hers. That was the bitterest part, that we had grown to know one another that well, and it had come to this. "Miss Carr," I said, and I heard in my own voice the old peremptory note and would not stop it. "I have been made to feel this week that I am under a sentence, and I confess I do not know for what crime, and I have come to ask you plainly to lift it, or to name the offence. I made you upon that terrace as honest an apology as ever a man of my rank made to any living soul. I have humbled myself in this city for 6 weeks together. I have done everything a man may do. I think I have earned the right to an answer, and I have come to ask you for it, and I will have it. Will you have me, or will you not?" She turned then and looked at me, and I have never in my life been looked at so, before or since. There was no anger in her face. That was what I had not reckoned on, and what undid me. I had come armed against her anger, and she gave me none. She was quite calm and quite pale, and her grey eyes rested on me with something in them that was worse than anger, being pity, and a settled sorrow, and beneath both a thing that had made up its mind and would not be moved. "You will have it," she said quietly. "Yes. I think you have earned that, at least. You shall have it plain." "Isabel, no," she said. "You will hear me now as I heard you. You ask whether I will have you. I will not. I will not have you, your grace, and I want you to understand that it is not a thing you may argue me out of, nor wait me out of, nor wear down by being present in every room I enter until the waiting itself becomes a kind of siege. It is not a mood. It is not a woman's temper over a name, though you have told yourself all this week that it was. I have watched you tell yourself so. It is my answer, and it is final, and it is the second time I have given it you. And there will not be a third, because after tonight I will not give you the occasion." I stood very still. The music went on at the far end of the room, gay and small and far away. "You asked me once before," she said, "in a garden in England, whether I would be your duchess, and you did not ask it as a question at all. You announced it as a man announces which of his horses he will ride. And I refused you, and you could not comprehend the refusal, for no one had ever refused you anything, and you told me so. You stood on the path and told me, in a voice I have not forgotten and will not, that no one refused you twice." She let that hang a moment between us in the candlelight. "Well, here it is, your grace. Here is you twice. I have refused you twice. I refused you in England, and I cross a sea, and I make a life, and I am happy in it. And you follow me over the mountains and spend 6 weeks teaching me, against everything I believed of you and of every man of your kind, to hope. And then upon a terrace with the whole valley gold below us, in the very moment I had begun, God forgive me my folly to think the man I feared was gone and a truer one come in his place, you showed me in a single sentence that he was never gone at all. He was only waiting. He was waiting for another man to come near what he had decided was his, and the instant it happened, out he came, whole, the man who cannot bear that a thing he means to own should have a friend, or a will, or a life not arranged to his hand. And you have spent the week since not repenting it, but resenting me for having seen it. Do not tell me otherwise. I have watched your face across 3 drawing rooms, and I have read every line of it. Every word was true, and every word went into me like a blade going home, and the terrible thing was the gentleness of it. She was not striking at me. She was telling me, patiently as one tells a child a hard thing it must learn, exactly what I was. "I would sooner," she said. And here her voice did at last waver, and steady itself again by an effort I could see. I would 1,000 times sooner have my freedom and my poverty and my Florence. This city where I am nobody and beholden to no one and may look at a wall of pictures until the light fails and answer to no man for how I spend my hours. I would sooner have that to the end of my days and die a spinster in a rented room with paint on my fingers than be the Duchess of Alderley and be, every day of my life, a thing that was one, for that is all I should ever be to you, not a person. A conquest that had given some trouble in the taking, and was the more prized for it, and would be set upon a shelf when taken, admired, and never once, in all the years, truly looked at. You told me yourself you had never looked at a single thing you owned. I heard you say it, in the cloister, and I believed you, and I have not forgotten that either. I will not be a thing you own, that you may fail to look at. I would rather be poor and free and unlooked at by choice than rich and possessed, and unlooked at by yours. There's nothing I could say. For the first time in my life there was, before another human creature, simply nothing that I could say, no rank to invoke, no eloquence, no command, no coin. She had taken the whole of me in her 2 hands and turned it over and shown me the underside, and it was exactly as she said. And we both knew it, and to have argued would only have been to prove her the more. Falcone is waiting to take me into the music, she said more gently now, the worst of it said. I am going to go to him, and tomorrow, your grace, I think you must go home. Not because I hate you, I do not. That is the pity of it that I could have. She stopped and pressed her lips together and mustered it. You must go home because there is nothing here for you but the slow ruin of us both, you pressing and I refusing, until we have made something ugly of what was, for a few weeks, very nearly beautiful. Let it be nearly beautiful. Let that be the end of it. Go home and be a duke, and marry some gentle girl who wants a coronet, and will never trouble you by having a soul of her own that you must reckon with, and you will both be tolerably content, and you will never think of Florence again. And she inclined her head to me, as a woman does who is closing an interview, and turned and crossed the warm, bright room to where Falcone stood, and he saw her coming, and his face changed at the sight of hers, for he read her too, and he did not smile his easy smile. He looked at her with a grave tenderness and gave her his arm. And she took it, and the 2 of them went in together toward the music, and were gone among the company. And I stood alone in the window with the dark city at my back and the candles burning, and understood that it was finished. I do not know how long I stood there. The music ended and began again. People passed me and I made them some answer. I have no notion what. Once across the room I saw her laugh at something said to her, a small tired laugh, and put her hand for an instant to her eyes, and I understood that the thing had cost her too. That she had not done it lightly nor with any pleasure in my hurt. And that understanding was somehow the hardest of all to bear. For a cruel woman I might have hated, and hating been comforted. But there was nothing to hate here. Only a clear-sighted one who had told me the truth and grieved to have to tell it. I have found, in the long years since, that there is no loneliness in the world like standing in a crowded lighted room among people who are enjoying themselves and knowing that you have, by your own hand and none other's, put yourself outside the whole of human warmth, and that the door out of the cold is one that only you could have shut, and that you have shut it fast. At length I got myself out of the rooms and down the great cold stair and into the street, and I walked, without knowing where I walked, through the black narrow ways of that ancient town, over the river and back, under the shut faces of the palaces, past the little grated windows all barred now for the night, and the cold came up off the stones and I did not feel it, and somewhere in the small hours, in a square I did not know, with a single lamp burning before a shrine set into a wall, and the water of a fountain talking to itself in the dark, the thing turned to me at last. For I had gone out of those rooms still nursing, out of long habit, the last coal of my grievance still framing, even then, even in ruin, the case for the injured party, the man who had abased himself and been refused. And somewhere in that black walk the case fell to pieces in my hands, because I had run clean out of the strength required to go on lying to myself, and what was left when the lying stopped was very simple and very terrible, and it was this, that she was right. That she had been right on the garden path 3 years before, and right upon the terrace, and right tonight in the window. That she had been right about me from the first hour, and I wrong about her from the first hour. And the whole long history of us was nothing but a woman seeing clearly and a man refusing to. She had never once mistaken me. I had spent 6 weeks fancying that I was showing her a new man, and all the while there had been no new man. There had only been the old one on his best behavior, holding his breath, and the moment his breath gave out, there he stood, I thought, walking. Of all the little scraps of grace I had gathered up over those weeks, and hoarded like a beggar the quarter hours of her true attention, the teaching before the pictures, the silence on the terrace that had been better than any speech, and I saw now that I'd gathered them not as a man gathers what is freely given in gratitude, but as a creditor gathers installments upon a debt, keeping a private account, reckoning always how much nearer they brought me to the sum I meant to collect, which was herself. Even my humility had been an investment, even my patience had been a species of siege, the more dangerous for being slow. She had said the word herself in the window siege, and it had gone through me because it was exact. I had laid my patience about her like lines of circumvallation, and called it love, and waited for the walls to come down, never once conceiving that a person is not a fortress to be reduced, but a soul to be known, and that the knowing is the whole of it, and there is no reward behind the knowing to be seized, the knowing being itself the only reward there is or ever was. And I saw, in that cold square, with a completeness that I can only call the first honest sight of my whole existence, that the fault had never been in her refusing. That was the lie I had carried over the mountains and worn like a second coat, that a refusal was a wrong done me, a thing to be reversed, a locked door to be got open by whatever means. It was not. Her refusal was the truest and cleanest thing in the whole affair. It was the one entirely honest act performed by either of us, and I had spent 3 years and a journey across a continent trying to overturn the single honest thing in reach of me, because I had been raised from the cradle in the unquestioned faith that the world was a thing arranged for my having, and that a no from anyone, upon any matter, was simply an error not yet corrected. No one refuses me twice. I had said it to her on the path as though it were a law of nature. And she had made it come true in a way I had never dreamed it could, and shown me in the making that it was no law of nature at all, only the creed of a spoiled and frightened man who had never in his life been told he could not, and had mistaken that lack for greatness. I sat down upon the cold rim of that fountain, a duke, alone in a foreign square before daybreak, and I put my face in my hands, and I reckoned with him at last, not with her, not with Falcone, not with the cruelty of chance that had brought his voice along the terrace at that one ruinous moment. With him, with myself, the man I had been for 35 years, and never once looked at any more than I had looked at my own pictures, and I understood, sitting there, that there were only 2 roads left out of that square that a man could take, and not be a scoundrel. The one was to do as she had bid me, to go home and let her be, and leave her the freedom and the peace and the Florence she had crossed the sea to keep, and never trouble her again to love her. If this wreck was love, enough to take myself out of her life for good, and the other was harder. And I did not yet know if it was even possible, or only another and subtler form of the old presumption dressed in penitent clothes, to stay and not to press, not ever again to press, but to become truly, and to the root, and not for 6 weeks, but for whatever was left of my life, a man she might one day, of her own entire free will and owing me nothing, look at and not turn away from, to change utterly, or to go. There was no third road, and there never had been, though I had walked what I fancied was one for 6 weeks, and the loss of her had been the price of my learning that there were only the 2. Which I would take I did not that night know. The fountain talked in the dark, and the little lamp burned before the shrine, and the cold came up through the stone into my bones at last, and I felt it now, felt everything now, every degree of it, and I sat on, twice refused and wholly alone, with the woman I loved asleep somewhere across the black river, beyond my reach, and my rank worth nothing, and my name worth nothing, and my whole life's certainty pulled down about me in the dark, and, for the first time in the 35 years of it, I saw the man who had done the pulling, and did not look away. I took the harder road, and I did not tell her I had taken it, because to have told her would have been to make of it one more thing laid at her feet for her to reckon and reward, and I had done at last with that. I did not go home upon the morrow, as she had bidden me, But neither did I stay to press her, and there is a world's whole difference between the two, and it was the labor of the months that followed to learn to live inside that difference. The morning after the fountain I wrote her a letter, the only one I ever sent her in that whole long, quiet season, and I made it as short as I knew how, for I had learned in a single night to distrust my own eloquence as a man distrusts a drink that has thrown him once already. I wrote that she had told me the truth in the window, and that I had spent the night proving it to myself in the streets, and could no longer dispute a word of it. I wrote that she owed me nothing, not an answer, not an hour, not the smallest civility of the eyes across a room, that she had never at any moment owed me anything, and that the whole of my folly had been to come to her as a creditor when I had no debt to collect and never had. And I wrote at the last, the thing that cost me most to write, and that I found in the writing I meant more wholly than I had ever meant anything, that she was free of me, not that I released her, as though the freedom had been mine to grant, only that she should know I understood at last it had always been hers, and that I would trouble her siege no longer, and that if I stayed on in Florence, for I meant to stay, it was not to lie in wait, but because I had a great deal to unlearn and thought I might as well unlearn it in the one city where I had first been taught anything true. She need never see me. I would keep from the rooms she was in. She was to consider me from that morning as a man who had gone home, save that he happened to breathe the same air, and the air of Florence, I had noticed, was large enough for that. I sent it, and I heard nothing, and I had known I should hear nothing, and for once in my life I did not stand about waiting to be answered. That was perhaps the first honest act of the whole of my existence, to do a thing and want nothing back for it. To send a letter into silence, and let the silence be a full and sufficient reply, and not to construe it, not to weigh it, not to turn it over by candlelight for the buried. Yes, I might read into it if I strained. A man who has lived 35 years reading every silence in the world as a door not yet forced does not learn in a night to let a silence simply be. I learned it slowly and by main strength. And there were nights that winter I rose from my bed and stood at the cold window, and had to hold myself in the room by the two hands, so strong upon me was the old certainty that if I would only go to her, only speak, only lay the case once more and better, the walls must come down as walls had always come down before me, and each time I put the certainty away, and lay down again, and let her sleep across the black river unbesieged, and each such night, I have come to think, undid a little of the ruin of 35. Though I felt at the time only that I was dying by inches of a self-denial no one would ever see or thank me for. What I did instead I can scarcely set down without a smile at my own expense, for there was nothing grand in it, and the man I had been would have thought it beneath a gentleman's notice. I began to learn the city. Not as I had learned it before, as a gallery through which to walk beside her and gather up her attention, but for itself and alone. I took the rooms I had, plainer ones, and I stopped keeping a carriage, and I walked. I went back, by myself, to the wall of pictures before which she had once taught me to stand, and I stood before them a whole forenoon with no one to perform my attention for, and I found, to my astonishment, that the thing she had told me was so, that if you give a painted face long enough of your silence, it begins at last to give you something back, and that I had gone 35 years owning galleries of the stuff, and never once received a farthing of it, because I had never once stood still and been poor before it and asked. I learned the names of the masters as a schoolboy learns them, late and humbly. I made, God help me, a friend or two men who did not know I was a duke and would not have cared, a bookseller near Santa Croce with ink to the elbows, an old painter half blind who let me sit in his workroom of an afternoon and say nothing. There was a queer new pleasure in it that I had never tasted and cannot to this day wholly account for, the pleasure of being nobody. In the plain rooms, walking with no carriage and no consequence and no man in the street who knew my name or cared, I found that a weight I had carried so long I had taken it for part of my own body had somehow been set down. All my life I had been the Duke of Alderley before I had been Dominic, before I had been a man at all. And here, in the narrow ways of a city that had been old when my line was nothing, I was only a tall Englishman with grave manners who stood too long before the pictures and paid the bookseller in coin like anyone else. And I found that I liked him better, this nobody, than ever I had liked the Duke. That he was easier to be, that he could look at a thing without first calculating what it was worth to him, and greet a poor man without condescension because he had forgot to feel superior, and sit an hour in silence in a blind painter's workroom wanting nothing, taking nothing, and come away richer than a season of triumphs had ever left the other man. I had thought, coming over the mountains, that I came to win a woman. I begin to think now that I came to lose a duke, and that she was only the one soul on the earth clear-sighted enough to show me he was worth the losing, and I found Falcone. I went to him deliberately some weeks on, because I owed him a thing and because the new road, if it was to be walked at all, could not be walked round the man I had wronged with a name spat like an oath along a terrace. I found him at his own house, and I asked to see him, and he received me with that grave courtesy of his that I had once taken for the smoothness of a rival, and saw now for the plain good breeding of a better man than I. I told him I had come to beg his pardon for having named him on the night of his own party, as though he were a theft I meant to prevent rather than a gentleman and Miss Carr's friend. I told him I knew what he was to her, and that I had no more claim upon her than the beggar on the cathedral steps, and that I had come only to say I had been a bore to him and was sorry for it. He heard me out, and was silent a moment, and then he did a thing I have never forgotten. He poured me a glass of his wine with his own hand, and gave it me, and said, in his careful English, "You have changed, then, since the terrace. I did not think you would, and when I said I hoped to God I had, or was trying to, he looked at me a long while with those dark steady eyes and said something I have carried ever since. She will not be won, Signor, you know this now, but she may be joined. It is not the same road, and few of your rank ever find it, for it cannot be ridden down. It must be walked, and walked without knowing whether there is anything at the end. I have walked a little of it myself." And he smiled without bitterness, a man who had measured his own chances and found them wanting and taken it like a gentleman. "I think," he said, "she will not walk it with me. I have long thought so. I tell you this not as a rival yielding his ground there is no ground. It was never mine to yield, but as one who wishes her happy, and who begins to think, against his own hopes, that you might make her so. If you can go on being the man who came to my door this evening and not the man who stood upon my terrace, that is the whole of it. Can you go on?" I said I did not know, and he said gravely that this was the first true answer he had had from me, and we parted if not friends. Then something a great deal better than the enemies I had cast us for, and he bowed me out into the night, a worthy man stepping aside from a doorway he had every right to hold, and I went home through the dark streets humbled past all speaking. That my rival should prove the better instructor in the very thing I had crossed a continent to want. The winter turned. I did not press her. I kept my word and stayed from her rooms, and if we met by the chance of a narrow city at the bookseller's, once, both of us reaching for the same shelf. And once upon the bridge in a hard bright wind I bowed, and gave her the day's greeting, and passed on, and did not linger to be looked at, and did not manufacture the meeting again. It was the hardest discipline of my life, and the only wholly honest work I had ever done. For the temptation was forever at my ear to make my very restraint into a suit, to let her see how well I forbore, to press by seeming not to press. And every time I caught the thought I put it down, because I had learned at the fountain that a siege by patience is a siege still, and I would not lay one more line of works about her, though I died of the keeping off. And so I was not looking for her, was truly and for once not looking. On the March afternoon she came to me. I was in the old blind painter's workroom, sitting as I often sat, saying nothing, watching the last of a grey light go off the roofs, when there was a step at the door, and I knew it before I turned, as I had always known it, and turned, and it was Isabel. She stood in the doorway in her plain dark cloak with the wet of the streets upon it and a colour high from the stairs, and she looked at me a long moment, and I got to my feet and said nothing at all, for I had schooled myself so long to say nothing to her that I had, thank God, nothing ready. "I have read your letter," she said, "a great many times. I kept it. I did not answer it because I could not tell for the longest while whether it was one more of your campaigns, the cleverest yet, the surrender that is really an assault." She came a step into the room. "So I have watched you all the winter, your grace, as once I watched you across 3 drawing rooms and read your face and found the old man in it. I have watched you these 5 months not knowing you watched, or rather, and here the ghost of her old dry humour crossed her mouth, knowing you did not watch, which was the whole of what I watched for. I saw you stand before the pictures with no one by. I heard of you from Falcone, who is your friend now, it seems, and speaks well of you, which I did not think to live to hear. I have seen a man take himself out of my way, and keep himself out of it for no reward, month upon month, when there was nothing in it for him and no one to admire the doing. Her voice was not quite steady. And I have come to the end of finding the old man in your face, though I have looked and looked. He is not there. I do not know when he went. But he is gone, and I find that I have been standing all winter at the edge of a thing I ran across a sea to escape, and that I do not, after all, wish to escape it, because it is not the thing I fled. That was a man who wished to own me. This is a man who has learned to let me be, and it is the second I cannot, it seems, keep myself from loving. I could not speak. I who had never in my life wanted for a word stood before her with none, and it was the truest homage I ever paid her. I will not be won, she said, and there were tears standing in her eyes now, and she let them stand, unashamed. And you have stopped trying to win me, and that do you understand it? That is the only thing that could ever have brought me here up these stairs of my own feet. If you had pressed me once more, I should have gone to England and married the dullest man in it to be safe from you. But you let me go. You truly let me go. And a woman may walk toward an open door, your grace, who would have died sooner than be dragged through it. She drew a breath. So I am walking. I am here of my own will and on my own terms, and owing you nothing, as your letter said, and I mean to keep it so inside the thing as well as before it. I will not give up my Florence. I will not give up my hours, nor my wall of pictures, nor my own mind, nor the paint on my fingers. If I am your Duchess, I shall be a strange one and no ornament to your shelf, and you must never once try to set me on it. On those terms, and no others, and freely, and because I have come to it myself, and not because you drove me, Dominic, I will have you. Reader, I did not deserve her, and I knew it, and I have gone on knowing it every day of the 30 years since, and it is the knowing that has kept me, I think, halfway worthy of the gift. We were married in the spring, in Florence, in a small old church with the almond trees in flower along the wall outside, and Falcone stood up with us and gave her away with his own hand, and kissed her cheek and shook mine and wished us joy, and meant it, and there was no bitterness anywhere in that bright morning, which is a thing I have never understood the whole mercy of, and have long since stopped trying to. She wore no jewels. She would not. She carried a common bunch of the almond blossom she had gathered herself from over the wall, and she was the most beautiful thing I have seen in my life, before, since, and the plainest and the freest. When the old priest asked her, in his slow Latin, whether she took me, she did not lower her eyes as brides are taught to do. She looked full at me across the little space between us, with all her clear grey candour, and answered so that the whole church might hear it, as one who has weighed a thing entirely and chosen it entirely, and will have no one, least of all herself, mistake the choosing for a surrender. I have heard the word yes spoken in my time, in every tone that flattery and interest and fear can lend it. I had never before that morning heard it spoken as a free woman speaks it, out of nothing but her own will, owing the hearer not one syllable of it, and I understood, standing there, that I had spent my whole life among counterfeits of the word, and was hearing, at 35, the true coin ring for the first time. We went home to England when the summer was gone, because she wished at last to see it again on her own terms and with her own hand in mine, and no one able to make of her a conquest carried back in triumph, and she made Alderley over into a place with light in it, and hung her Florentine pictures where the family faces had glowered, and taught me, room by room and year by year, to look at the things I owned until they gave me back what she had first shown me a wall of strangers' faces could give. She is upstairs as I write this, grey now as I am grey, and no less herself, and no more mine than she was that afternoon on the painter's stair, which is to say wholly and freely, and not at all in the way I once meant that word. I said to her once, in a garden in England, in the arrogance of a man who had never been told he could not, that no one refused me twice. She refused me twice. I have thanked God for it on my knees more times than I can count. For the first yes I ever sought I should have seized and spoiled and never seen, and the yes I was given at the last, freely, by a woman who owed me nothing and chose me anyway, was the only thing in all my gilded life I never bought and never won, and could not command, and it is, I have found, the only kind of yes on this earth that is worth the having.